welcome to the third and final day of the Milani Web Fest in the Bird Centenary Web Fest series organized by the UNESCO Chair in Global Adult Education at the University of Malta, Department of Arts, Open Communities and Adult Education, Faculty of Education. The two languages for this WebFest, because of the nature of the topic itself, are English and Italian. Also to facilitate, as we did over the last 2 days, the participation of our speakers, our guests from Italy. The majority have already spoken. We have one today, Andrea Potestio from the University of Bergamo, will join us at 6:30 sharp because he has a meeting before that. And quindi I will start today. I'm the program. I'm listed as a speaker. I'm slated for this session today. I'm going to talk about Don Lorenzo Milani and his International Sociology of Education relevance. So we heard a lot about Don Milani over the last 2 days. We heard about Don Milani's theology. We heard about Don Milani's pedagogical approach, and very interesting and innovative approaches. Yesterday, we had Federico Battini from the University of Perugia talking about la lettura a alta voce. So it's not just writing collectively, but reading aloud. And we also had an excellent presentation by Alessio Surian from the University of Padova about la scrittura collettiva, for which there's been a great tradition in Europe. Célestine Freinet in France, Mario Lodi in Italy, and of course the School of Barbiana, who learned a lot and exchanged with the schools of Mario Lodi. Mario Lodi died a few years ago. I think he turned 100. Anyway, and we also had about how the treatment of literature with a big L and also a small L at the School of Barbiana, the novels and the writings that were treated in the School of Barbiana, from the readings about Don Milani, that they read stuff such as Thornton Wilder, Shakespeare, Pirandello. They acted six characters in search of an author. Actually, that was done in the previous school of Don Milani in San Donato di Calenzano, where he had a lot of youth and adults involved. Although adults, let's not forget, were also present in our Barbiana. It was open to anybody who could attend, as long as you participated as part of the thing. And even if you are a visitor to Barbiana, if you were a visitor, many journalists were attracted towards Barbiana. It made the headlines, Barbiana, at the time. Don Milani ti metterà al lavoro. It puts you down to work. If you're a photographer, you go there. It asks you to do a session with the youngsters about photography, etc. So we heard a lot about this over the last 2 days. Today, because of my specialization in sociology of education, will deal with Don Lorenzo Milani and his impact or his resonance with sociology of education. Now, I am going to be, I will not narrow my focus to just sociology of education. You can talk about education thought, critical educational thought in general. So can I have the second slide, please? Yes. So Lorenzo Milani I'm sticking to the slide. I normally don't do this in my lectures face-to-face, but here I'm very much conscious of the time. I wouldn't want to go over half an hour. Lorenzo Milani is certainly and well known, especially in Italy and many other parts of Southern Europe, especially Spain. He's got a huge following in Spain. It was also mentioned yesterday or the day before, and Latin America. We heard from Daniel Shugorensky, my colleague and friend from Argentina, how they read Lettera a una professoressa in Argentina secretly, furtively, because of the military regime at the time. So for a military regime like you had in the 70s, I go back to yes, uh, in the 70s, that kind of education was anathema. When you have an authoritarian system, any kind of education which promotes freedom, which promotes a kind of liberating education is anathema if they know what's being taught. I mean, you all know that Maria Montessori was praised because she brought honor to the patria under Mussolini. But the moment they saw what was happening in her schools, she was accused probably of anarchism, and she saw they closed her schools, just like the church did in Malta to Dun George Preka's Society of Christian Doctrine schools, because he went against the grain of teaching everything in Latin and interpreted through a mediator, which is the priest. So so Latin America, and they also translated Don Milani's work in Spanish. However, he has a very good, great following in Spain. And the key figure there, I would have loved to have had him over for this webfest, but as I said before, he could not make it because he's undergoing tests in a hospital because of health issues. Is Jorge Corso Toral and no, Jose, Jose, scusi, because it's not Portuguese, it's Spanish. Jose Corso Toral. He's a leading theologian from Salamanca, from the Pontifical University in Salamanca, and he's one of the leading figures. And he has created a movement of profesores milanianos. They are teachers of Milanian inspiration, Milaniano. Okay. Now in Latin America, as I said, Daniel Shugorensky, who was one of our speakers on the first day, talks about how under the regime, a friend of his, Carlos Vani, lent him a copy with a mischievous smile. This will revolutionize your thinking about education, and it was La Scuola di Barbiana. Now, as Daniel himself told us, Don Milani, people know this book, but they don't know of Don Milani because this book is not officially authored by Don Milani. We'll have to emphasize, Don Milani insisted that this is the work of the students. Don Milani was guiding them on his deathbed. As you know, he suffered from and succumbed to Hodgkin's disease, which is a kind of cancer. And if we get the recording with Eduardo Martinelli, he'll probably tell us how they used to discuss issues which became relevant for the text, a famous text, Lettera a una professoressa, while Don Milani was lying on his bed discussing with them. And there were some interesting discussions that he had with them, which didn't make their way into the lettera. We have an interview with him, for example, from a Jew, Don Milani was a Jew, on the the Palestinian conflict, the Six-Day War at the time. He died in 1967. There was a Six-Day War. And they were all supporting Israel, and he would tell them, this is documented in an interview we have with Eduardo Martinelli, I poveri sono gli altri. The poor are the others, the Arabs. This is very interesting. This is Don Milani. It's always a concern with the poor, with the disenfranchised, because for them is the kingdom of heaven. So he believed a lot in the Christian message of the meek shall inherit the earth. He having derived from la alta borghesia, upper class family. Remember, there's a very important addition to his surname. He always signed Don Lorenzo Milani, but it was Milani Comparetti. I mean, his family had great prestige, apart from being very rich, rentier class rentiera. You know, Nera Fallaci says, who wrote his biography and died soon after, Nera Fallaci, the sister of Oriana Fallaci, more famous, she says, if there were 15 cars in Florence at the time. Two of them were owned by Milani's father, who was employed as a chemist in industry and was a professor pro bono. The rich people didn't need a salary, but they needed the prestige of teaching at a university. And apparently, like in Malta, we have judges doing this kind of thing and magistrates, etc., in the law course especially, but also in other fields. Milani's father was a professor of chemistry without earning a penny because he didn't need it. And they had the different houses, one in Florence, one in Castiglioncello, one near the sea, etc. So a country house, one near the sea, very well to do. He was also taken to school by a chauffeur. And he was so embarrassed by it that he used to tell the chauffeur to drop him two steps before, due fermate prima, not to be in the embarrassing situation of appearing in front of his peers, che lo avrebbero stuzzicato. They would have probably teased him for that. And the other one was when he was a youngster and chose, because he had the liberty to do this, you know, too much of a very good thing. You know, going to university was nothing special for him. It may be special for a working class child, but for him, this is something taken for granted, par for the course. So he didn't. He opted. He wanted to become an artist, and so he went to the Brera Academy. And he was once drawing in a vicolo inside I don't know where, Florence, etc. And he had his easel, and he stopped to have his lunch, and he started eating. These were obviously poor quarters, and obviously he took out his lunch and he was eating white bread, and the woman chided him. Nobody eats white bread in these areas. It shows it's a marker of your socio-economic status. So this is what we're talking about here. So, but this it is his particular reading and these kind of experiences which brought home to him his privileges. And of course, his particular reading as a person, remember this, coming from an atheist family, he's not your average Italian who was raised like we are in Malta as a Catholic, where we take Catholicism for granted, which is part of our, even if we are non-believers, but it also affects our forma mentis. We take these things for granted. He was looking at religion from a different perspective. He came from the outside. I mean, his mother remained an atheist till the very end, even after, despite their close relationship. And when she was interviewed by Nicola Fabretti, uh, uh, um, and he was said, did Milani's relationship change your attitude to religion? She said, no, my. She said, atheist, I remain an atheist, despite my love of my son, who died prematurely, as you know, 46, I believe, if not 43. I'm not going to check but in his early to mid 40s. So he died quite young. And so so he came from the outside, and I think, in my opinion, when you come from the outside, you look at things differently. And his interpretation of the Vangelo, which for him was sacrosanct, that the Vangelo was I mean, any kind of social equity that he developed was inspired by the Gospels, not by Marxist writings, not by any socialist writings, but primarily by his particular reading of the Gospels, which also found support in Florence, but created several enemies, because you also had people who were inclined that way. You had a famous mayor, La Pira. You also had who they wanted to beatify, or they probably have beatified him. There was also Cardinal Elia della Costa, a very famous cardinal in Florence, very famous by painting of him at the Museo Opera del Duomo by Kokoschka, of very expressionist. So these were kindred spirits. There were also many kindred spirits throughout Italy, spirits who must have influenced and must have actually enhanced the drive towards a new council, the Vatican Council II, ironically led by Pope John the 23rd, the famous Angelo Roncalli, who, when Bishop of Venice, was so much perturbed by a stroncatura, a terrible review of Milani's first and major work under his name, Esperienze Pastorali, that, and this is lack of rigor on John the 23rd, on Angelo. He was Bishop of Venice then, but this is a bit of lack of rigor. I learned this from Domenico Simeone in a conference in Bergamo recently. He read the Stroncatura and he took the decision to ban the books from the Libreria Cattolica, which probably is the Pauline. You go to Italy, you want to, now today, those are the major vendors of Don Milani's books. If you want to buy any book by Don Milani, all you have to go to is to Italy, go next to the Duomo, you will always find the Libreria Pauline. And you, 9 times out of 10, you're going to find lots of Don Milani books. But it wasn't always like that. But then of course, when he became Pope, Angelo Roncalli recanted, and he said, there are many people who may have upset us with their very radical approach to religion, but we have to listen to them. And amongst them, there would have been also Don Primo Mazzolari and many others. So it was not just Don Milani. So the book which was banned is a very important sociological book. In my opinion, it is a classic of 1960s sociology, late 50s, 1960s, which is Esperienze Pastorali. Now, that book has been authored by Don Milani, period, not Scuola di Barbiana, even though there are references to Calenzano, etc. But it is authenticated. This is actually authored book. Then there are other volumes by Don Milani, but they were sort of posthumously put together and published as books. The most famous is, I think, L'Ubbidienza non è più una virtù. He never wrote a book called that, but he has his defense, which has been written when he was accused of lack of respect for the fallen in the 2 world wars, because of his choice of obiezione di coscienza, obiezione di coscienza. So you all know what that means. Refusal to take up arms, like Muhammad Ali had done, and many other people, Ziagenstatter in Austria, who was beheaded because of that. And when the Nazis took over France, he was an Austrian, and the Romero, Oscar Arnulfo Romero's cry just 24 hours before he was murdered inside the cathedral. That's why he was murdered, for people to lay down their arms. There's a much bigger law than that of the government. That's the law of God. Thou shalt not kill thy brother. And that cost him his life. So, objection of conscience, or objection of conscience. So this is also very interesting sociologically. He never wrote a book called L'Obbedienza non è più virtù, but afterwards they put together the letter to the judges, where he defended himself and posthumously won the case, and also was vindicated, that is, and also his reply to the Cappellani Militari, the military chaplains, who would always justify, why people were killed. And these are important works. They come together into this book. And I will argue this book is a very important book in terms of what is being written today. I mean, this is the thing about Don Milani. He's prescient in the sense that he anticipates a lot of what has been taken up, not in Italy, but because in Italy, he himself was a contributor to the debate. But what in the Anglo-American literature came later. And this is my point here. So we have the critique of schooling, And we also have the critique of something which has now entered schooling in many parts of the world. If you follow what's happening in North America, for instance, now here I go, I forget my slides all of a sudden. For example, today a lot is being written in the educational research about anti-militarization. If you're taking a critical perspective. Now, I think Don Milani has a lot to say about this. So some works were made accessible to an English-speaking leadership by Don Milani, and the lettera featured in a study unit, listen to this, Education and Society, which was a course in sociology of education or educational studies run by England's Open University, featuring Roger Dale. Now, I don't know if Roger Dale surprised me when he mentioned this to me because I asked him whether he was familiar with this work. He said, not only am I familiar, we used to teach it. Now, they never taught it under Don Milani's name, but under the School of Barbiana. And that was a chapter in a book, a compendium for the Open University called in the 70s. This was early 70s, called Schooling and Capitalism. And there were pieces by Bourdieu, I have it, pieces by Bourdieu, pieces by Gramsci on intellectuals and other people. Eric Olin Wright and somebody else, Leo Panich, I believe, Don Milani. It was three editors. There were Jeffrey Esland, Roger Dale, and Madeline McDermott, who's now Madeline Arnold. They use it. So, but many of them don't know it's Don Milani. It's the School of Barbiana. Well, because Don Milani says he was only guiding on his deathbed. The students did the work, and therefore they should get the credit. And that is the classic work that we'll be speaking about, Lettera a una professoressa. It is an exercise in collective writing. It falls within a tradition of collective writing, which has produced some important, I wouldn't say masterpieces, but key works. Later, you have another important key work along that vein, where students together collectively wrote, and that is called Managing the Crisis. It is a book produced by students at Birmingham University at its Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. Stuart Hall was at the heart of it, of that course. But it was not by Stuart Hall, it's by the Birmingham School, the students themselves. They produced something collective, like a collective manifesto. The great thing about this is that it is not encumbered by too much theory. That doesn't mean theory does not lie at the heart of it. If you read the Lettera Professoressa, it is impossible to think that the people, the students, the 8 boys who wrote this, there were 8, were not exposed to some of the critiques which today are staple within any course of sociology of education. It is likely impossible. But they did not allow that, as we academics do, or I tend to do. We also want to show off our erudition by encumbering that piece of work. The work is a narrative based on vignettes, which actually highlight the issues in a very mundane, very immediate, quotidian, day-to-day experience. It reminds me of a medieval poem. If you read it in colloquial English, running through, called Pier Plowman, which is actually about medieval life. It's like social documentation. Well, this is an indictment which the students themselves put together, learning and working hard at their own collective writing. This is a very important point. Writing doesn't come naturally. It can be taught. And the best way to do it, one way to do it, is to write collectively. This is something which they take up in the lettera. Now, I don't have the time to go into the lettera. We've heard about it. When they say, with a great touch of sense of skillful repartee, umorismo quasi non da contadini, urbana, when they say, The teacher says, the fictitious teacher, Professoressa, now they had nothing against teachers. Some of them became teachers, like Eduardo Martinelli and such. But that particular kind of teacher who was quite, um, despite all the great work that some great teachers do, you have them in the schools who, with the stroke of a pen, can destroy a person's life, una bocciatura, like they say. And this teacher arrogantly says, scrittori si nasce. You either born as a writer or not. And then they continue with a skillful repartee, this line. Eppure tu continui a dipendere un salario di professore di italiano. So in other words, what the hell are we paying our taxes for, from which derives your salary? For what the hell are we paying you your salary when writers are born? So it's your job to teach how to become a writer. And this anticipates, I mentioned this yesterday, this anticipates a lot which has been written later. One person who comes to mind when one reads Milani's work, and particularly La Lettera, for short, okay, La Lettera, is, for example, one of the most cited, certainly the most cited sociologist in education. All you have to do is look at Google Scholar and see, do sociology of education and see who's number one. Pierre Bourdieu, a Frenchman, who did a lot of anthropology, actually, originally. Pierre Bourdieu is a household name. Well, a lot of the theories of Pierre Bourdieu are anticipated in the Lettera. They are anticipated. And no wonder, therefore, the Open University uses this text, because it is, rather than belabor the students of education with a lot of theory, you have a narrative, a flowing narrative based on vignettes and also based on personal experience, collectively written, come together collectively with a very good sense of logic, which is very important, which actually gives you the same kind of insight into what is wrong with the educational system. And one point they make with the reference to this particular teacher statement is, we do, and this is something that Bourdieu wrote later, not because he read the Lettera, convergent minds. And I have my theory of how this came about. Is, we often examine students, if we're not careful, for skills that we never teach them. One of them is style. It's a matter of style. That's why he gets an A or she gets an A and you get a C. There's a question of style. But we never ask ourselves, how do you teach style? Style often reflects your cultural background. And your cultural background doesn't come from nowhere. Some people don't need a school to get it, because it is their own social milieu which gives you that approach, savoir-faire, savoir dire, okay? You bring it with you, and what the school is doing is it legitimizes that particular kind of culture and delegitimizes other cultures which are just as valid but belong to a different, they derive from a different kind of milieu. And Bourdieu made this point. And this is anticipated by the battuta. They don't go into theory, they don't write a whole paper about it, but that battuta, you can write a whole essay about it, about how we examine students on issues which have much to do with their social background and not with our actual teaching. We don't, but Don Milani, the School of Barbiana, don't just simply provide critique. They use critique, if anything, in the German sense. This is badly used in the Anglo-Saxon. They use in the Anglo-Saxon, the Anglo-American, sorry. Critique is taken as criticism, which is not in the German sense. Critique is critical analysis. So to talk about the language of critique and the language of possibility, that's tautologous, because critique also has possibility. And the lettera de una professoressa, lettera a una professoressa, has both criticism and has both possibility. There is also alternatives. And the alternative is, how do you write and learn how to write? Now, there are many ways. There's not just one way. But one way which is being promoted because other people were doing it in Italy at the same time, and on the continent, Transalpini in France with Celestine Fernet, was to get people writing collectively. Now, this is an indictment of what happens in our schools because our schools do not promote the collect. Well, you may have some creative, enlightened teachers. Thank God for that. These people exist, okay, in little pockets, but they exist, and we should highlight this work. But the whole system militates against it. I am not supposed to collaborate with my friend because we have to put our satchels between us. We should not see what each other we are doing. We are all individualistic in our system. It's a system which is competitive. And the more neoliberal we have become, the kind of ideology which prevails, which has prevailed over the last 30 years, the more competitive we are. It's all competition rather than cooperation. And cooperation is when you talk about these things, you are like a pie in the sky. But the alternative is to teach and learn collectively and also write collectively, read and write collectively. We don't do this. We don't do that. And that's an indictment of the capitalist system, how it's reflected in education. And also that things are there to be taught and not just rely on what you bring with you in terms of your social background. Pirandello, sorry, slip. Pasolini, Pierpaolo Pasolini, was very much, he engaged with this book. Now we are talking here about an icon who finished badly I'm not going to go into the reasons for that, but an icon of the 60s and early 70s in Italy. This was a time in Italy, this book came out at a tremendous period of challenging authority in Italy. In Italy, there's a common mantra of fatto 68. Well, Don Milani and his students were part of that 68 movement. The book Lettere a una professoressa was not just an education book, a critique of education, but a critique of Italian society. And here I'm quoting Pasolini. Pasolini, you will find this on YouTube, is on record as having said, non ho mai letto con tanto entusiasmo un libro come questo. È un vento di vitalità. Mi fa ridere, ma mi fa piangere allo stesso tempo. È una critica della scuola italiana, la scuola pubblica italiana, ma è più di una critica della scuola, è una critica della società italiana. Non per nulla, that particular book became a manifesto for the 68 movement. And I'm not making this up. Many people say this. I remember we had a lettrice from Italy in Malta. When I showed her the book, she was part of the 68 movement. And she was glowing. Now, this is interesting because it is written by people who were cast off from the formal system. Voi non siete degni di un'educazione, andate nei campi. They are cast out, but they call them dropouts. They are actually pushed out, and they found succor in a place in Barbiana where so many hours of working in education done in a particular way, not like the school does, were much better for them than working long hours in the field. La scuola sarà sempre meglio della merda, is written in the text. And of course, it was a school of life. They brought in things which matter in life. You read the newspapers and answer back. Now, this is where Don Milani's cultural capital comes in, because you answer back. It's not easy to get into the newspapers, but Don Milani had context, personal context. He put these resources at the disposal of the students. Having said that, remember that their work becomes a manifesto for the 68 movement. Now we think of the 68 movement. Who comes to mind? Well, mostly beneficiaries of the school system itself, students. We think of 68, we think of the students in Paris. We think of the students also in Italy, which reformed the university system in Italy, became more Università della Massa in Italy. not as it was before during that time. So these students were out on the streets fighting the police in Valle Giulia in Rome, and Pasolini being a very critical, uh, complex thinker. That's what great intellectuals are. You cannot put him on one side. He supported the police because voi avete tutte le facce di figli di papà. I poveri sono gli altri, as Don Milani said with regard to the Israel war. All of a sudden, these students are protesting and using as a manifesto. These students are what in the vignettes in the lettera professoressa are known as Pierini, the figli di papà, Pierini, daddy's children, the bourgeois childs. And they have passed through that system, which is very selective. And what are they promoting as a manifesto? A text written by De Gianni, those who are discarded, thrown into the fields, but through the efforts of Don Milani and his guests as educators who used to help out. He didn't have teachers. In fact, the students were the teachers themselves. They used to, the older ones used to teach the younger ones, etc. It's all about peer tutoring, self-teaching. He didn't have the logistics. He didn't have the teachers to do this. So he would teach the older students, and the older students would teach the young ones, and they will not move to the next stage unless everybody has listened and has. Trying to see how I'm doing for time. Joe, give say everything. Joe. Anyway, because I can't check the time here.
Peter, you're still in the first slide.
No, the slide is not important. I mean, come on. Once I get going, the slides I can always share. I can always share with those who are interested.
Okay.
I am never. I'm never tied. I'm never tied to the slide. I never tied. You know, I prefer the flow. So what happened was they. What time? How much time do I have left?
Oh, well, it's
okay, it's 53. 7 minutes to go.
6. So
7 minutes to go. Okay. I'm gonna go over the last. So this is a very important point. The Pierini supported the work of the Gianni. So this is a rovesciato tutto. The people who are cast out of the system produced maybe the major text. Anyway, that is Lettera a una professoressa. Now, it was used in many places. Some people don't associate it with Don Milani. The one book which probably Don Milani should be associated because he himself wanted it and he authored it was Esperienze Pastorali, which in my opinion, in my modest opinion, is a classical, great sociological text. And I'm talking about sociology, period, not sociology of education, but sociology, period. Now, I mentioned Bourdieu. Che cosa accomuna Milani a Bourdieu? What brings them together? Well, one very simple reason. One was French, and Don Milani was accurant with what was going on in France. He could read French, and he could read and speak French and German. His mother was Austrian of Trieste, Alice Weiss. She also knew English. She was tutored personally to show you their wealth, by James Joyce. Having said that, so Don Milani was very accurant, and people of that generation were used to be very proficient as a foreign language in French. Today it's English, but at the time it was to be French. So he was very, very aware of the criticism in France of the ideals, the limitations of the ideals of the French Revolution, which is, what did the French Revolution produce? It produced bourgeois institutions. It was a bourgeois revolution. So in other words, both Bourdieu and both Milani, now I'm not going to talk about whether they've read each other. I doubt it. I mean, Bourdieu had nothing from Milani to read at the time. But they were exposed to the same kind of currents within the literature, both fiction and also social philosophy, which the French have become very great, together with the Germans, which is the critique of bourgeois institutions. So when you look at a bourgeois institution, and you look at the limitations of what we call meritocracy, which favors those who have more resources than others to compete, then you begin to understand the affinities between the school of Barbiana and Bourdieu. So that's one point. But there's another aspect, and I would like to conclude with this, but I already referred to it. And very few people take this up in the literature. They talk about the school of Barbiana. There are some very important insights within Esperienze Pastorali. Now, one very important quote from Esperienze Pastorali is this. People ask me, come si può, given what they consider to be the success of the school of Barbiana, is come si fa scuola? And he says, Don Milani, I don't know the quote, but if you are asking me for a blueprint, you're mistaken. There is no such thing as a blueprint. Elsewhere, he says, the school of Barbiana started in Barbiana and ended in Barbiana. We raised this issue. There is no mix and stir recipe. You ask me, how do I do schooling? I'm translating literally, come si fa scuola. Sbagliano domanda. These are his exact words. Sbagliano, si dovrebbe chiedere come devi essere per poter far scuola. It's not a question of how you do school. That is often conditioned, not determined, conditioned by the context. If you want to create a school inspired by Barbiana in Malta, it will be a different school because the Maltese context is different. Okay, but how do you have to be? It's a question of being, okay, which is basically why are you teaching? What are the values which inspire you in your teacher? What are you after in your teaching, etc., etc. So this is a very important quote in Don Milani. Second thing is, and this brings me now to the final point. The final point is about what is mentioned. Right now, there's a trend within sociology of education, especially driven by people like Henry Giroux in North America, because of what's happened in the United States over the years, which are spreading everywhere right now to Israel and other places. This culture of militarization. Militarization is being driven to toys, etc. There was a time in Malta when I was brought up, you want to have a Luger, if I'm using the correct term. Okay, these were the toys. Then they were banned by the Mintoff government. And of course, with the free market, they come in again. But right now, you have computer games, you have war games, etc. These are being seen as a way of attracting people, especially working class and Black people in America, towards a kind of employment which will probably result in body bags. And that is militarization. There's an anti-militarization trust amongst critical educators. Well, Don Milani has a lot on this. Don Milani and his students, but particularly Don Milani, provide they provide grist for the mill of this anti-militarization. And the main text for this, which can really sit well with contemporary anti-militarization education, is not L'obbedienza non è più una virtù, which was created posthumously by the two documents. Because what you do have there is a overview, very rigorous. I haven't heard anybody who has denounced the kind of historical facts and conclusions produced by Don Milani, how to read history against the grain, particularly the First World War. And what Don Milani does there is he reviews critically his own education as an elite child during the time when Italy was enjoying the so-called dubious glory of its empire. It's small but empire, where they used poisonous gas in Abyssinia, saltavo di gioia per l'impero, was Don Milani. This is the kind of education to which he was exposed. And what he does is he turns this round, reading history against the grain. How, for example, the First World War was a ripoff, how it pitted workers from different nationalities against each other in an imperialist project. Si squarciano a vicenda. This is the phrase he used, okay, to glorify the quest for imperial expansion on both sides of the divide, and ordinary working class people, and they are duped by the kind of rhetoric and the kind of nationalistic rhetoric. And Don Milani was very anti-nationalistic in this respect. He loved the Italian language. He was very much a stickler for good Italian, but he said, if you're going to define the world into who is this and who is that, I divide the world into ereditati e disereditati, and my support is towards the latter. Of course, one has to take it with a pinch of salt. No matter how convinced you are, how ethically committed you are to the poor, you don't jump out of your skin easily. So I'm sure there have been contradictions there, and I would have loved to have asked this to Eduardo Martinelli, because it's not that simple to be an upper class person and then all of a sudden you live like the poor. You try hard, and he tried hard. He tried hard because also by his own conviction. For example, when he was sent to Barbiana, maybe not as a punishment, this is from a conversation I had with Eduardo, maybe because it is non è detto that because you are the vice parroco and the parroco dies, you become a parroco. You have to do a tirocinio somewhere. So maybe he would eventually be sent as a parroco to another place eventually. But he was not, he was humble enough to avoid the advice of his parents. His parents, who had no truck with religion, would say, okay, they gave up at the end of the day. He wants to become a priest. Okay, adesso fatti carriera. Jockey for a position inside the Vatican. No, the first thing he went to Barbiana was he bought a plot of land to create his own grave, which means I'm going to be buried there. And he was buried with the vestments of a priest and the mountain boots, the boots he used in the mountain. He was determined to be there. He said, this is God's grand design. Who am I to change, di prendere il pennello e alterare un po' il gran disegno, dal gran disegnatore. So he accepted this thing. That's noble. Okay. But of course, I'm sure there would have been great contradictions, as we all are. You can be ethically committed to a different class, and you go to great lengths to do this, but there will always be contradictions. You never jump out of your skin. Having said that, however, so the critique of schooling is great. The critique of an institution such as the church is great, although he was critical, but the moment the priest or the cardinal told him, taci, shut up, he would stop. He would stop because he did not want to create a schism within the church. He believed in the unity of the institution. He was he could have been divisive, but he supported the unity of the church. Anyway, and the third one is militarization. So these are the three things I claim. Sorry for taking a bit longer, but I end there. I stop there. Thank you. Okay, I went 5 minutes over. So, next speaker on our list is my good friend who just told me that I have to cut it down. I just went 5 minutes over. Is my friend Michael Grech, who teaches at the University of Malta and its junior college. Is a philosopher by training, graduate of the University of Birmingham and St. Andrews and Sheffield and University of Malta.
Philosopher is too big a word, Pete. And sorry for that.
Oh, yeah, well, whatever. That's anyway. You introduce yourself. Your topic is?
My topic is some reflections on Don Milani's pedagogy with adults at Calenzano, at San Donato di Calenzano.
So you're going to talk about the earlier Don Milani, which is more in tune with this, with the chair, because it's where he worked with youths and adults, particularly.
Okay.
San Donato di Calenzano, before he was sent to Barbiana. A te la parola.
Grazie. I'm
Sei
going
iscritto a
to.
parlare. Ne hai
Sorry,
facoltà.
screen sharing is not possible.
Yes,
Yes.
of course.
Okay, no, because
I'm going to unmute. I'm going to mute myself.
no, because it says host disabled participant screen sharing because I have a PowerPoint. Hello,
no.
hello.
Hello, Michael.
Hi, Joe. Is it possible to screen
Yes,
share?
yes. You've got the rights.
Okay, second. All right. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Okay. Some using this PowerPoint to orient myself. Please don't refrain from stopping me if I say something which is awful or which is not clear or whatever. Okay, so as Peter was saying, okay, my thing is called Some Reflections on Don Milani's Pedagogy with Adults at San Donato di Calenzano, and as Peter rightly said, okay, this is perhaps more in tune with the theme of with the theme of the conference because it has more to do with adult education. Basically, I'll try to give a brief history, not history. I mean, I will refer to some facts and to some episodes from Don Milani's stay at San Donato. I will, at times, by of comparison, okay, compare this to his stay at Barbiana, which is much more famous, okay, and we'll try to I will try to point out two things which perhaps are maybe quite relevant to us, okay, and which spring from his work at Calenzano more than at Barbiana, okay. So after being ordained a priest, okay, Don Milani was, as Peter also hinted, first assigned to San Donato di Calenzano. Calenzano is a place, okay, San Donato is one kind of district parish in it, okay, where he spent 7 years between 1947 and 1954. This is the coat of arms of Calenzano. And also another thing, which perhaps maybe, now I'm a bit assuming, maybe I'm making some assumptions. Calenzano is perhaps, okay, it's also interesting because it's somehow less distant, okay, from the context where many of those who write and comment on Milani's pedagogy work and operate compared to Barbiana, okay? So though Barbiana tends, perhaps for the right reasons, okay, to get primary attention, okay, by many people who write in contexts which are very different from those in which Milani was working at Barbiana. Calenzano is perhaps less distant. I use less distant rather than more akin because, again, it's still distant in terms of time, distant in terms of sort of time, historical epoch, social composition of the place, etc. But it's still, I mean, there is less distance in Calenzano compared to Barbiana in relation to many of those who write and comment on Milani's work. So, for instance, one of them is the size, okay? Calenzano was a parish of 1,500 souls, okay? At San Donato, rather, Calenzano was bigger. Barbiana was a small hamlet with 100 different persons, okay, inhabitants. Okay, this is the church of San Donato. San Donato is, even geographically, located 68 meters above sea level. Barbiana is a hamlet, okay, dispersed on the mountains, 192 meters above sea level, okay. Sorry for the typo over there, as Napoli. Okay, this is San Donato. One thing which is worth noting about San Donato, okay, and this is very typical of Central Italy, okay, is that the environment was highly anti-clerical, was heavily anti-clerical, okay, rancore verso il clero, okay, there was a lot of hate towards the clergy, so it wasn't a very, I mean, it wasn't a cushy kind of job. Okay, this is anti-clericalism in Italy had very deep roots. Okay, this is, for instance, the page from one of the ones, socialist newspaper L'Asino. Okay, much earlier in the century. Okay, and it found fertile grounds in many communities, and San Calenzano was one of them. Okay, in a letter to Elia Dalla Costa, Milani attributes this to the poor social conditions of the congregation, okay, this anti-clericalism, and to the real or perceived collusion between the clergy and the ruling classes. Okay, so Milani was very much aware, okay, that he was, I mean, using football jargon, playing away, okay, and he tried to understand why is it of the hostility, and basically he had this reading. Also, a lot of parties, a lot of people sympathized with the socialist and communist parties, both by condemned by the church in 1948. Keep in mind, okay, the context is post-war, okay, post-war Italy was on the side of the Axis defeated. The monarchy had been abolished, fascism, okay, had been defeated. The anti-fascist, okay, Arco-Costituzionale, it was called later, the anti-nationalist, the Comitato di Liberazione Nazionale, whatever, you have Christian democracy, communist, socialist, I mean, Republican liberals, it was splitting, okay, very much on the chasm lines of the what would later be the Cold War, and you had very important electoral kind of, I mean, elections and referenda in the late 40s. The first was between monarchy and republic, okay, which saw the republic, okay, defeating the monarchy by a few votes, basically, and this had suggested to some people on the left-wing camp, okay, which you had at the time, socialists and communists, they had formed an alliance together. They thought that basically that if that result reflects anything, then we stand a chance of, okay, getting power, okay, getting to power via an election rather than in some other way. Then you had the elections in 1948, where, okay, with the church throwing its weight behind Christian democracy as well as others, okay, the Democrazia Cristiana won a landslide, and that, especially in the red areas of Italy, created a bit of bitterness and the like. Okay, so it was a very, very, I mean, the context when Milani, okay, went to San Calenzano was very turbulent. Milani, this is very interesting, okay. Milani is, especially at the time, a firm anti-communist, okay, as is evident from many letters which he writes both to his religious superiors. One might say, okay, let's take these with a pinch of salt, okay, but also to members of his family, okay. He is firmly anti-communist, okay, though, as we shall see later, okay, he approaches communism, okay, the way the approach he takes towards communism, and especially towards communists, is very different from the ones which the church's hierarchy, okay, wanted its clergy to take. But it's still, I mean, it's still quite evident, okay, his firm anti-communism is very evident from many letters of these days. Also at San Donato, he publishes his first articles in various publications, including one by another famous priest in the region, Primo Mazzolali, and also, as Peter rightly indicated, okay, Esperienza Pastorali, okay, the book Esperienza Pastorali, which is, as Peter defined it, as sociological landmark. Quite interesting, something which I found quite interesting, I mean, it's and I would like to delve deeper when I have time, is that contrary perhaps to what is the case with his publications at when he was at Barbiana later, I mean, there are much more conspicuous references to the social teachings of the church, okay, in his writing at San Donato, okay, so social teaching of the church, I mean, especially those encyclicals which had to do with work or with the conditions of the working classes, like Rerum Novarum Conditionum, as well as, okay, with and also there are references also to the work of Thomas Aquinas, to Aquinas' Summa, okay, especially when he comes, okay, when he discusses issues like, for instance, okay, whether private property is an absolute right or not, okay, or whether there could be circumstances, okay, where the right to private property could be trumped, okay, by other considerations. In San Donato, he opens a school, okay, in 1947, he opens a school, okay. The school is non-denominational. This is something which many have hinted, okay, have hinted at, something many have indicated, and which we'll discuss in relation to something else later in in my presentation. So the school was non-denominational, sorry, okay, there were no religious symbols, yet it was considered by him, at least this emerges from some of his writing, as a means of evangelizing in an indirect way, okay? So the idea here seems to be that, okay, you evangelize, you bring the good news of the gospel, okay, rather than by preaching, okay, somehow like that vaguely one may brings to mind what a phrase which is associated to St. Francis, okay, so through one's example rather than through outright preaching, okay, so it was a way, so the school was non-denominational, but again, it's important not to read, okay, behind this choice motives which Milani may not have had, okay, he might have been quite pragmatic under it in that context, okay, but he still wished his school, okay, to present, okay, one way his school, what the contribution it was making, he was making through his school, as one way of showing or giving witness to his audience of what it was to be a Christian and to be a Christian priest, okay, perhaps quite different from the way in which the average priest at the time would have behaved. Also, another difference, okay, between Barbiana and San Donato is the background of the students. Okay, at Barbiana, his students were primarily peasants. Okay, at Calenzano, the background was both peasant and proletariat. Okay, so you had this difference, okay, this quite important difference in the catchment area, okay? Some things that we'll find later at Barbiana were already there, were already in place at San Calenzano. So there were no billiards or table soccer, okay, which were very popular and which characterized both Catholic and communist circles at the time. Okay, the idea that you attract young people through these activities, and then I'm not using it in a, the first word, and then you indoctrinate them, whether religiously or politically, okay, after, okay, once they come there to meet each other and play billiards, table soccer, whatever, okay, Milano was against this. Okay, he was adamantly against this approach. Something which was already at San Donato, I mean, pedagogically, was okay using radio and newspapers to teach language. Okay, not teaching language or not teaching language only through set books or manuals, but also using the most current technology of the day, which was radios and newspapers. Also, you already find a link between, okay, teaching language or learning a language and being a sovereign citizen. Keep also in mind, at the time, you had the Italian constitution, which was being written, framed, and basically approved. The Italian constitution, again, okay, the people who contributed primarily to it came either from left-wing parties or from the primarily, I mean, not exclusively, the left wing of the Democrazia Cristiana, which was, earlier Peter mentioned one of the important figures, Giorgio La Pira, which was a genuine left wing. Okay, it wasn't just something, I mean, you had figures like La Pira, you had figures like later Fanfani, but also very important, for instance, Enrico Mattei. Okay, so yeah, the Italian constitution coming into being, which focused, okay, on this idea of the sovereignty of the citizen. Okay, also at Calenzano, we already find something which we'll find later in Barbiana, which was the Conferenza del Venerdì. Okay, on Friday there would be a meeting, a conference, and someone, okay, would be invited, okay, to deliver a speech, explain something. I don't know. At one point, they invited someone to explain them, I mean, the concept of right, diritto, or whatever. The impression I have, though, okay, someone who would introduce students to Beethoven, for instance, okay, you already had it in Calenzano, in San Donato, and something which this is my impression. Again, perhaps if I have time, I will go deeper into it. The impression I have is that there was, at San Donato, there was more emphasis on the guest teaching the students than at Barbiana, where you had this aspect as well, but you had also the idea of, it was very much encouraged that the students should grill the guest. You already had it in Calenzano, but I think the emphasis, okay, this aspect was, okay, more, at least this is, as I said, it's an impression which I have to go through, okay, when I have time, but I think this aspect was more marked at Barbiana. Other features, okay, so I mentioned some points which were, some aspects which were common or somehow common between the two contexts. Okay, now I'm going to refer to other features which were more specific to Calenzano, and maybe more pertinent to our context. The first, I will be mentioning basically three. The first is something which has to do with an insight which you don't find a lot in Calenzano. You find it later in Barbiana, which I think is somehow overlooked. I will talk about it in a few minutes. Other aspects which are overlooked in Calenzano, which I think are worth, okay, delving upon, especially, okay, for people who are working in certain, okay, for people who are working in certain contexts. Sorry. Okay, so one difference is that, okay, the school at Calenzano caters primarily for adults. Okay, the school at Barbiana, on the other hand, had the average age of the pupils was much younger. Okay, the age bracket is in Calenzano was from 17 to 30. Okay, the number you had over there was I got my figures right, originally 40, and later it grew to 60. Okay. Also, something which is very important and which perhaps is again there's more affinity for many of us who are into education. Okay, with Calenzano than with his experience in Barbiana, is that students had limited time in contrast to Barbiana, okay, which operated on a not 24/7, 12/7 should be there, because you have 12 hours, 7 days a week. Students, the time students spent at school in Calenzano, which was much more limited, okay? Many had jobs, okay, so they had to reconcile the two. And they had to see their instruction as functional or practical in some way. So it wasn't something that you simply went there, okay, simply just in a bohemian manner, kind of. Also, something which is very different in the context is that there is no gung-ho attack on exams as such, okay? The idea questioning the whole thing about exams, which you find in Lettera a una professoressa, is something you won't find at Calenzano, okay? A number of students indeed came to Milani School to take exams, okay? And the success rate was quite conspicuous, okay? In contrast to the situation which spurred, okay, the writing of, which occasioned the writing of Lettera a una professoressa. Also, something else which at Calenzano the classes were streamed. Okay, you had 3 different classes, okay, depending, and you would follow a course depending on what you wanted, whether it was basic literacy, whether it was whether you wanted to pass a particular exam, okay, licenza elementare, or whether you wanted something else. The school indeed gained official recognition by the state in 1948 and held official exams, again approved by the state, in 1949. So something which stand out in Calenzano is that Milani could be less kind of idealistic, okay, or less, I would call it monastic bohemian. I will explain it later. At Calenzano than at the 12/7 school in Barbiana, both regarding the extent of the school in terms of time, topics, etc. Okay, had to be much more focused. Okay, and in terms of what he expected the students to do once they obtained their education. Okay, in a recent work, this is the work Pete which I indicated by a guy called Paolo Landi. It seems that Milani, at least according to this, I mean, Paolo Landi was one of his students. He's not possibly one of the best known, but he seems Landi seems to indicate that Milani, okay, wanted his students, okay, at Barbiana to become teachers themselves, and he was somehow disappointed. Okay, he wanted them to teach other people. Okay, he wanted them to become teachers. He wanted them. It seems that he saw it as a kind of mission. Okay, so what he did with them, okay, poor mountain boys, they could do in other contexts perhaps, but basically it's the same vocation. Okay, and it seems that he was somehow disappointed, okay, when they took other jobs. Landi says that basically, okay, they kind of reconciled somehow when he said, okay, when he told him, okay, or wrote him and told him, and wrote or told Milani, Esma, okay, I'm taking another job, but I'm going to be active in the union, in a trade union and the like. this is something. This seems to, and this is in a way, at least the way I interpreted it. This wasn't kind of an ideal wish by Milani, that he wanted them to be a kind of he had this great mission for his students at Barbiana, because it reflects something, an important issue which has riddled, I think, the relation between the left and education throughout the years. Okay, so for many years, for many decades, people on the left, whatever that means, had seen compulsory free education for all. It had made this an aim, and it had basically seen an education. Okay, it wanted education for working people, okay, or children from the working classes, and it saw that there were two benefits of this. The first is that the masses would have access to knowledge or science. Okay, so knowledge would no longer be limited to those in the upper echelons of societies, with the effect, okay, this had in terms of hegemony and control. Again, here we have a caricature from the Socialist Levante. The second one, which is more problematic, and which is the thing which I'm alluding it to, education was seen as a means, okay, for socio-economic improvement. Now, and here is the thing, throughout the years, it wasn't at all clear whether this socio-economic improvement would be collective, something that might imply that, I don't know, peasants, via the education they get, okay, they become more militant and manage to improve their lot, but still remain peasants, or whether it would become, okay, or whether education would simply be a means that would provide individuals within those classes which were somehow deprived, whether it would provide a means to these individuals to make their way out of their class. The impression I got from that book is that somehow Milani was afraid that this would happen, and that's why somehow, maybe I'm reading too much, and that is why somehow he was skeptical of them, or he was somehow disappointed that they didn't continue, that they didn't sort of undertake teaching as well. At Barbiana, at Calenzano, okay, so this is something. At Calenzano, this kind of reflection was, Milani did not make this reflection, okay? It hadn't sort of matured to that point. Still, there are two important things which I think emerge very much from, very glaringly from his work at San Donato. The first is that despite the functional or utilitarian, okay, aim of his school, Milani still thinks of it as an opportunity for what he calls innalzamento culturale, okay, cultural enhancement, okay. For instance, okay, to instruct, okay, as a means of instruction, he uses plays, okay. In one of the correspondence, I mean, he writes about using a play by Thornton Wilder, okay. Again, you have the aspect I referred to earlier, okay, bring in some expert each Friday, where these experts, okay, would be grilled. So as I said, I suspect that in a manner which was less radical than what was the case in Barbiana. And this is the key point. Milani's experience at San Donato seems to somehow implicitly deconstruct between the dichotomy which you frequently find, and which is frequently made in a lot of literature, between vocational and or utilitarian education or functional education on the one hand, and education, okay, aimed at cultural enhancement on the other, okay. Milani, okay, seems to somehow deconstruct this dichotomy and to have elements of both, okay, and to have elements of both in his work, okay. And this is the first. the key probably is, apart from having using methodology which is both functional, culture enhancing, to build trust, okay, pedagogical and personal, so that learners will see that culture is not a waste of their time. Also, and this is the final point, the final aspect, there is the idea, and I return to Milani's anti-communism, but I apply the insight in a different way, of engagement with those on the other side, okay? As I said, the emphasis was on the education, on the non-denominational educational nature of the school. You have engagement with communists and socialists, okay, which is perhaps given his anti-communism. Milani recognized that the poor felt represented by these parties, as evident in the letter of Pipetta, and the victory of the other side is also a victory of those who are oppressing the poor. Yet he takes the good shepherd approach, he follows his flock, yet he does not accommodate himself to his choices, okay? He engages in dialogue with those who follow what to him are wrong, false shepherds or prophets, okay? Again, keep in mind, we are speaking of the time of the, not John the 23rd, but his virulent anti-communism of Pius XII, distinguishes between sinner and sin, and tries to understand why they would make the wrong choices, okay? Why is this relevant today to us? I think, this is my personal opinion, today many who work in Europe and North America face a similar challenge, face a challenge that is to some extent similar. One of them is the fact, I mean, what's mentioned on the first day, that the indigenous working classes in Europe, in many places in Europe and in America, North America, are perhaps listening to false prophets, okay? On the other hand, this time on the other side of the political spectrum. I'm referring to the right, okay? I don't know, so you have, this was witnessed, I mean, in Trump and Trump's election and in many similar, okay, events around the globe. Unfortunately, what remains of the left, okay, be this political academic, has, okay, one of the reasons, I mean, it could be, it has lost touch with this sector of society, and contrary to what Milani did, it seems unable to distinguish between sinner and sin, and also to repudiate the latter, or the former, sorry, the sinner, while dialoguing with instead of indeed dialoguing and loving the former. There's also the tendency, okay, to pathologize this constituency, refer to its ignorance, and simply dismiss it with labels. Whereas the key question should be, and I think this we have to learn from Milani a lot, why do they fall for it? And to engage in critical dialogue. One final point to Gramsci, after all, okay, even going back to Italy, etc., when Gramsci grappled with fascism, he didn't merely condemn, he tried to analyze the reasons for its existence. Sorry, I had to scream. Thank you. I hope it makes some sense.
Yes, definitely. Of course, these are only to provide some ideas, then to delve deeper into it. I am happy to see Andrea Potestio in linea con noi, is in line with that, connected. I just want to make a brief announcement. Unfortunately, for a misunderstanding, we did not carry out the recording of the presentation by Eduardo Martinelli. This is going to happen on Saturday. What this means is you can hear it, the recording, when everything is put on the website. Remember, this is doesn't stop here. This is there for posterity. It's being recorded throughout every intervention, even the Q&A afterwards, and everything will be placed like on the previous occasions on the website, which is a resource. And in this case, we will have material in Italian and English, and there will also be Eduardo Martinelli's intervention which takes place on Saturday. I wish we had him live because we have many questions to ask. Maybe he could answer from his direct experience there certain queries which have emerged. Now, without further ado, but we have time on our hands because we don't have the last registrata, the last recorded. We move to the Italian language, which is going to be used by Andrea Potestio from the Università degli Studi di Bergamo, who is going to give us his presentation now. So Andrea,
Thank you.
benvenuto. Mi senti?
Sì. Grazie.
Benvenuto. Benvenuto, tu parlerai del paradigmi di educazione popolare. You are going to talk about the paradigms of popular education, educazione popolare in Don Lorenzo Milani e il suo lascito, no? Possiamo dire. Ok, Andrea, come si sente? Com'è il clima adesso a Bergamo?
Freddo. Fa
Freddissimo.
freddino. Sì, è un momento un pochino di freddo, però va
Mi
bene.
è piaciuto, come città mi è piaciuto, ero lì. Ci siamo incontrati a settembre.
Sì, è stato un bel momento, un bel convegno su
Sì,
Don Milani.
c'è stato lei, c'era il professor Mazzini e anche Evelina Scaglia.
Sì,
Allora,
Simone.
tu hai la parola.
Grazie, thank you to Professor Maio, grazie a tutti per questo invito per la cattedra UNESCO, che è per me una bella occasione di parlare di Don Milani e di presentare un po' di riflessioni che abbiamo avuto l'occasione anche di svolgere in parte al convegno che c'è stato, appunto il professor Maio lo ricordava, con lui tra i nostri ospiti all'Università di Bergamo appunto a ottobre. Ecco, il tema di questo intervento sono proprio i paradigmi di educazione popolare all'interno dell'opera di Don Milani e il tema di quella che può essere riconosciuta come una forma di educazione popolare con una serie di rischi, di contraddizioni, di paradossi anche sull'idea stessa di popolo che Don Milani in qualche modo ci presenta. Un primo aspetto che secondo me emerge in modo decisivo per comprendere che cosa può intendere Don Milani con educazione popolare o idea di popolo è la dimensione storica. L'opera e il pensiero di Don Milani si possono comprendere riflettendo lui all'interno di un aspetto, di una dimensione che è quella della sua epoca, che è quella degli anni della composizione delle sue opere più importanti, degli anni 60 fino agli anni 50, esperienze pastorali e poi Lettera a una professoressa, e comunque di tutta la sua opera educativa da questo punto di vista. E la sua considerazione all'interno di un contesto storico è anche legato alla sua formazione, alla sua conversione, al suo avvicinamento al mondo religioso, al suo essere appunto un parroco e a quella che è in qualche modo la sua fede, una fede profonda che lo lega a determinati contesti e a una certa visione di quella che può essere l'educazione e delle modalità di realizzazione stessa. Dicevamo, educazione popolare dentro un contesto storico, in particolare se andiamo a leggere l'evento storico concreto più importante, più significativo di quegli anni, è la riforma relativa alla scuola media unica. È in quel contesto che bisogna, è opportuno rileggere l'opera di Don Milani, perché tutte le affermazioni che lui fa all'interno di una critica serrata a un'idea di scuola, a un'idea di paradigma scolastico, a un'idea di istituzione che viene messa in discussione, è a partire proprio dagli effetti della realizzazione della scuola media unica. Per esempio, vi volevo leggere brevemente una citazione tratta da Lettera a una professoressa, proprio quando i ragazzi, insomma, di Don Milani riflettono sulla scuola media unica e dicono questo. Abbiamo letto la legge e i programmi della scuola media nuova. La maggioranza delle cose scritte lì a noi ci vanno bene. E poi c'è il fatto che la nuova scuola media esiste, è unica, è obbligatoria, è dispiaciuta alle destre, è un fatto positivo. Fa tristezza solo saperla nelle vostre mani. La rifareste classica come l'altra? La media vecchia era classista, soprattutto per l'orario e per il calendario. La nuova non li ha mutati. Resta una scuola tagliata su misura dei ricchi. di quelli che la cultura l'hanno in casa e vanno a scuola solo per mietere diplomi. Ecco, qui vedete, secondo me, tutta la lettura di Don Milani, dei suoi ragazzi, scritta nella scrittura appunto un po' di finzione di Don Milani, facendolo dire nel lessico dei suoi ragazzi, ma tutta la contraddizione e la sua opinione contraddittoria rispetto alla riforma della scuola media unica, che vede legge come una novità, cioè qualcosa di positivo perché è un tentativo di cambiare una scuola tradizionale classista, evidentemente separativa, però allo stesso tempo è una scuola dell'obbligo, quindi apre a una formazione più ampia, più lunga e quindi da questo punto di vista viene letta positivamente, però è una scuola che è nelle mani degli stessi professori della scuola precedente. C'è un bel testo di Damiano e di Evelina Scaglia che ragiona sulla teoria dei due popoli e fa vedere proprio come la teoria dei due popoli si manifesta in modo forte, evidente, a partire proprio dagli anni successivi al 1962, quando la scuola media unica diventa legge, diventa norma. E Don Milani sta ragionando proprio in quegli anni lì, gli anni in cui i maestri si trovano a dover educare, formare e insegnare a una serie di ragazzi che non sono abituati alla scuola, che non sono pronti alla scuola, che non sono preparati alla scuola. Gli stessi maestri però non sono pronti a quell'allargamento, a quella massimificazione della scuola e dei ragazzi. E quindi questa mancanza reciproca porta a una serie di scompensi, porta cioè sostanzialmente alle bocciature che Don Milani denuncia in modo forte, ed è per questo che il testo ha una ripercussione così significativa. Qualche anno dopo, addirittura, lettera a una professoressa, viene citato in un esame di maturità, cioè viene utilizzato come testo da leggere, una parte sulla lingua, proprio per gli esami di maturità, proprio per far vedere quanto e come quel testo si era detto come critica a un certo tipo di sistema scolastico. Critica che ha il senso di esistere proprio nelle contraddizioni che prendono forma all'interno della trasformazione della scuola media unica. Qualche pagina prima, gli stessi ragazzi, sempre in lettera alla professoressa, avevano detto: finite le elementari, avevo diritto a altri 3 anni di scuola. Anzi, la Costituzione dice che avevo l'obbligo di andarci. Ma a Vicchio non c'era ancora la scuola media. Andare a Borgo era un'impresa. Chi ci si era provato aveva speso un monte di soldi ed era stato respinto come un cane. Ecco qui ancora le contraddizioni, i paradossi. Da un lato la scuola media unica è positiva, pone un obbligo, aumenta la formazione, l'aumenta per tutti, non solo per una classe, e questo è, dal punto di vista di un'educazione popolare, un fattore assolutamente positivo. Allo stesso tempo è un obbligo inserito nella Costituzione e quindi un diritto che le classi popolari hanno e rivendicano. Ma allo stesso tempo manca la scuola media unica lì vicino, Vicchio Paese, insomma, dove veniva questo ragazzo, non c'è la scuola e quindi il ragazzo non ci può andare. La scuola di Borgo era molto lontana e questo ragazzo poi finisce appunto nella scuola a Barbiana di Don Milani. Le forme di realizzazione da questo punto di vista della riforma della scuola media unica sono complesse, sono contraddittorie. Lo stesso ragazzo poi racconta quando va a Barbiana che si trova effettivamente in un contesto più adeguato alla sua formazione, a quello che era precedentemente la sua formazione di carattere popolare, e vive questa possibilità come una possibilità assolutamente positiva, una possibilità che gli era negato nelle altre scuole, laddove solo il cammino, cioè l'ora e mezza che lo aspettava per raggiungere questa scuola, non veniva letto come una forma di impresa in qualche modo, con una grande volontà di formarsi, quindi in senso positivo, ma quasi con fastidio, quasi come una scocciatura da parte della professoressa che poi va a finire che lo boccia in qualche modo, e per questo poi lui si rivolge appunto al modello di Barbiana. Quindi da un punto di vista significativo, l'educazione popolare di Don Milani non è l'educazione popolare tout court, non è un modello assoluto di educazione popolare che vuole proporre, ma è l'educazione popolare di quel contesto, di quegli anni, dentro quel tipo di riforma contraddittoria, che è stata contraddittoria con anche tante luci da molti punti di vista, che è stata la scuola media unica. E quindi e qui veniamo al significato che può avere la dimensione storica dentro il pensiero di Don Milani, quello che Bergson diceva con il moto retrogrado del vero, no? Qui la storia, la dimensione storica in Don Milani assume quello sguardo che è uno sguardo sempre che avviene a partire da oggi, da quelle che sono le nostre categorie interpretative. Quindi da questo punto di vista facciamo molta più fatica a comprendere quella che è una determinata critica che lo stesso Don Milani vive negli anni 60 e che lo portano a criticare quel tipo di riforma che, quantomeno in Italia, è diventato qualcosa di assolutamente accettato, cioè l'idea di scuola media, di scuola secondaria di primo grado, è qualcosa che è assolutamente integrato dentro un processo che non può e che non viene messo in discussione. Qui siamo in un momento in cui, e per noi è molto più difficile comprendere questo, in un momento in cui quel passaggio era messo in discussione. Perché quel passaggio, seppur positivo, sappiamo anche che dal punto di vista storico il passaggio della scuola media unica non è stato così indolore. C'erano molti movimenti culturali e pedagogici che parlavano di scuola post-elementare, quindi avevano una visione diversa rispetto al modello vincente di scuola media unica che poi è passato, e portavano quindi una visione di scuola un po' più plurale da questo punto di vista, che invece la scuola media unica come formazione unitaria ha in qualche modo negato. E ancora a maggior ragione la reazione di un prete, di un parroco, che vedeva proprio in questa uniformità della scuola media unica, vedeva l'esclusione dei suoi ragazzi, di quelli che chiama i suoi ragazzi, di questa matrice popolare legata alla formazione dei suoi ragazzi. Ecco, questo sguardo, diciamo così, ci permette un po' di limitare anche alcune interpretazioni un po' apologetiche che sono state fatte del pensiero di Don Milani, e allo stesso tempo di limitare anche alcune interpretazioni eccessivamente critiche e negative del pensiero di Don Milani, per esempio il fatto che in Don Milani non ci sia una fase propositiva, no? Che sia solo la parte distruttiva, decostruttiva di un certo tipo di modello. Chiaramente in Don Milani c'è un approccio decostruttivo rispetto a un modello, che era quello della scuola media unica, anche un tentativo di realizzare qualcosa di diverso, quindi la parte costruttiva nelle sue realizzazioni, come tutte le realizzazioni nelle classici della pedagogia, da Rousseau a Pestalozzi, questa fase poi di realizzazione è piena di ombre e di contraddizioni, no? Il Rousseau che dal punto di vista educativo addirittura rinuncia all'impresa, il Pestalozzi che dal punto di vista educativo poi fallisce anche con suo figlio e fallisce in tutte poi le imprese di educazione popolare che realizza per la sua difficoltà a mettere in atto aspetti più concreti. Ma allo stesso tempo aspetti e luci e temi di educazione positiva, di educazione anche costruttiva emergono e sono già in luce all'interno di quello che è il percorso che Don Milani mostra, perché già mettendo in luce alcuni aspetti negativi di quella riforma sta indicando un possibile cammino, che è una possibile idea di trasformazione di una certa idea di scuola, cioè in qualche modo qui Don Milani storicamente indica come il modello della scuola unica non è necessariamente l'unico modello di scuola possibile, ossia sta in qualche modo ipotizzando, mettendo in discussione un'idea di scuola che propone una formazione non flessibile, unica, no? Omogenea da questo punto di vista, per tutti un po' uguale, aprendo quantomeno alla possibilità, tutta da discutere, poi da progettare, di una flessibilità o pluralità dei percorsi di studio a partire da una certa età, quantomeno. Percorso che noi sappiamo, quantomeno in Italia, è fortemente stato discusso, fortemente stato anche demonizzato, messo in discussione e non particolarmente valorizzato a partire da quello che è tutto il mondo degli studi sul vocational, sulla formazione professionale. Ecco, altro paradigma che vorrei sottolineare, oltre alla dimensione storica nell'educazione popolare di Don Milani, è il tema della reciprocità. Ne studia, ne fa una riflessione interessante un autore che proprio ha studiato, un nostro collega a Bergamo, che è Fulvio Manara, che ragiona proprio come il tema della marginalità, il tema della povertà dei ragazzi di Don Milani è un tema in qualche modo che va a cogliere la dimensione del segreto della dimensione educativa e della dimensione formativa, ossia Don Milani ha in mente, quando si vuole occupare di questi ragazzi, dell'importanza della restituzione che l'educazione e la formazione devono dare. Educare ed istruire non è trasmettere, insomma, in qualche modo una decostruzione, una critica a un modello trasmissivo, puramente trasmissivo dell'educazione a favore di una dimensione relazionale. Lo si vede fin da subito, lettera della professoressa, quando i ragazzi descrivono la scuola in cui entrano e lo descrivono con uno sguardo quasi di stupore, questi tavoli, questa immensità, una scuola che non sembra una scuola, no? Questi tavoli dove si mangia, dove si sta lì, dove si guarda, e questi tavoli dove il ragazzo grande educa il ragazzo piccolo e il ragazzo piccolo appena entrato, cioè l'11enne sostanzialmente, vuole diventare insegnante, cioè la grande ambizione di volere poco dopo essere insegnante del ragazzo che poi entrerà al posto suo. Quindi questa dimensione di luogo di scambio, una dimensione che non a caso si apre a una durata molto ampia, quindi che non a caso non ha i tempi e l'organizzazione di una scuola, chiamiamo così, tradizionale. In orientamenti pedagogici nel 2016 proprio Manara mette in evidenza questo punto qui, no? La costruzione di luoghi scolastici, non luoghi in qualche maniera, che aprono a questa dimensione del desiderio, questa dimensione della passione, che è di fondo dimensione di reciprocità l'uno con l'altro, che non vi può essere forma di educazione o di relazione educativa se non c'è uno scambio che apre qualcosa nell'uno e nell'altro. Ecco, altro tema dell'educazione popolare in Don Milani che vorrei sottolineare è quello del tentativo di dare voce ai ragazzi, agli ultimi. Esperienze pastorali del 57 parla di questo, no? Li ho armati dell'arma della parola e del pensiero. Questo tema della lingua, che è un tema decisivo in Don Milani, la lingua che è bersaglio critico, cioè la lingua delle classi elitarie, la lingua delle classi agiate, la lingua egemone, cioè la lingua che esclude sostanzialmente, no? Ci sono numerosi passi in cui avete questa lingua serve solo per escludere chi non ha quel tipo di raffinatezza dai luoghi di potere, dai luoghi di educazione, dai luoghi di emancipazione. Allo stesso tempo, per evitare questo processo, è necessario dare parola a chi è escluso, dare parola ai ragazzi che non hanno quel tipo di strumenti, e dare parola trova poi la sua sommatoria, il suo epilogo massimo nella scrittura collettiva di Lettera a una professoressa, dove in qualche modo, nella più o meno finzione di quella scrittura, i ragazzi trovano la parola, trovano una loro parola, forme di parola popolare, diciamo così, che però permette a loro di stare nella discussione pubblica, nella discussione politica, anche su un tipo di riforma, anche per tutti gli echi che ha avuto questo tipo di aspetto. E qui sicuramente in questa idea di umanizzare il popolo attraverso la lingua riecheggia il legame con Freire, con questo grande autore di educazione popolare, che in qualche modo ha delle assonanze, delle grandi analogie con la riflessione di Don Milani, come in qualche modo ha messo in evidenza anche il testo di Corzo su Lorenzo Milani, analisi spirituale, interpretazione pedagogica. È lì che Corzo sottolinea in sostanza questa importanza della dimensione dell'ascolto. Dar parola al popolo, ai ragazzi del popolo, vuol dire saper ascoltare. Saper ascoltare vuol dire anche capire che c'è un linguaggio diverso dal linguaggio tecnico della scuola, che c'è un linguaggio fatto di esperienza, che c'è un linguaggio fatto di una certa cultura che deve emergere, che può emergere anche nei luoghi anche nei luoghi della scuola, o comunque di una scuola diversa da quella che era la scuola tradizionale che questi ragazzi esperivano in una dimensione solo privativa. Altro tema, direi ultimo tema che vi vorrei proporre sulle categorie e sui paradigmi di educazione popolare in Don Milani è il tema dell'emancipazione. C'è un testo recente di Scotto Di Luzio che parla dell'equivoco Don Milani, no? Dell'idea che a partire più che da Don Milani, da alcune letture che sono state fatte di Don Milani, ci sia stata una idealizzazione del povero, l'idea che nella povertà, nell'emarginazione ci sia una sorta di origine positiva da questo punto di vista, no? E che quindi più che il tentativo di celebrare questa povertà, lo scopo debba essere quello di trasformarla, no? Di portarla verso forme reali di emancipazione, di portarla verso forme reali in cui la povertà, la marginalizzazione possano entrare attivamente dentro la società. Ecco, sicuramente questo è un rischio, ed è stato un rischio nelle letture di Don Milani, però allo stesso tempo in Don Milani c'è anche uno sguardo di emancipazione che appartiene all'idea stessa di Don Milani, cioè a quel tipo di formazione storica che lui ha, a quel tipo di educazione religiosa che lui ha e a quel tipo di messaggio che vuole proporre e in qualche modo valorizzare, cioè l'idea del popolo, al di là di alcune possibili legami con una certa tensione di idealizzazione, no, della povertà o del povero o quant'altro, il povero non è colui che deve essere emancipato in quanto portato dentro la cultura borghese, no? In quanto trasformato in quella dimensione colta del linguaggio della cultura borghese affinché possa partecipare a quella forma di cultura. Ma il povero, diciamo così, è colui che può in qualche modo contendere qualcosa a quella cultura borghese, e intendendo questo contendere non solo come una rivoluzione, quindi avere gli strumenti per poter fare la rivoluzione nella classica lettura marxista, diciamo così, ma anche come idea stessa di un'origine o qualche aspetto di novità che la dimensione popolare porta dentro di sé. Gli aspetti innovativi, cioè una via innovativa, è un linguaggio innovativo, è una forza vitale che sarebbe dentro la dimensione popolare e che può portare dialetticamente a una trasformazione di quella che è la cultura borghese. In qualche modo la stessa cultura borghese, se perde questo vitalismo della cultura popolare, se perde questo legame con la cultura popolare, se riesce solo a emarginarla, cioè a portarla fuori e non a emanciparla, a portarla dentro di sé affinché il sé della cultura, diciamo, borghese egemone si trasformi, perde una sua autentica possibilità. In questo Don Milani sta vedendo e sta anche forse proponendo qualcosa, dicendo affinché si possa fare questo, affinché la cultura egemone possa in qualche modo essere vitale, deve essere in grado di dialogare, di essere pluralista rispetto alle dimensioni popolari. E forse questo messaggio dell'innovazione del popolo, della cultura popolare, è forse il messaggio più ampio, più interessante, più attuale che Don Milani ci consegna. In qualche modo non tanto il rischio dell'idealizzazione, il rischio del povero ma bello, insomma il rischio di lasciare il povero a se stesso perché tanto va bene così, ma quanto quello di una necessaria emancipazione del popolo, della singolarità di ogni elemento popolare, perché è la forza stessa di ogni cultura egemone. Se la cultura egemone, o se la cultura borghese, o se la cultura che in qualche modo organizza le forme di scuola, di istituzioni, di formazione, non riesce a essere in grado di dialogare e di accettare e di includere anche nella differenza aspetti di una cultura che non è sua, questa cultura egemone si frantuma, perde valore, perde dimensione. C'è un testo recente di Ricolfi, che lui discretamente critico nei confronti di Don Milani, che dice che sostanzialmente Don Milani e i testi di Don Milani sono nel lato di coloro che non riconoscono il merito, no? In Italia c'è molto questo dibattito sul merito, sulla meritocrazia. E Don Milani sarebbe colui che sostanzialmente dice i capaci e meritevoli dell'articolo 34 della Costituzione, di fondo non hanno tanto bisogno dell'aiuto degli altri, dell'aiuto delle istituzioni, bisogna più aiutare coloro che non sono capaci, che non sono meritevoli, che sono in difficoltà, no? Quindi l'idea di Don Milani, bisogna fermarsi finché l'ultimo non ha imparato e non ha appreso da questo punto di vista. E allora Ricolfi legge questo dicendo, beh, allora se questo, allora io vado sostanzialmente a generare una scuola che è per gli ultimi piuttosto che una scuola per chi è già capace. E in questo modo è vero che diminuisco la disuguaglianza, ma non permetto una progressione. E in questo senso ricolfi la legge all'interno di una dimensione di non capacità di riconoscere il merito all'interno dell'opera di Don Milani. Però forse, se leggiamo bene questo discorso del capace e del meritevole all'interno di Don Milani, in Don Milani c'è sicuramente un'idea di critica nei confronti di una scuola che è solo capace di riconoscere i capaci e i meritevoli, cioè solo capace di riconoscere quello che è uguale al proprio linguaggio e andare in quella dimensione. Quella è sicuramente una critica importante in Don Milani. Ma in Don Milani c'è anche proprio una critica a una scuola che ha come finalità di riconoscere, al paradigma totale della scuola che ha come finalità unica quella di riconoscere il capace e il meritevole e basta, verso una scuola che rimane invece più aperta da questo punto di vista, verso una scuola che in Don Milani dovrebbe essere in grado non di riconoscere solo ciò che la società individua per merito, solo ciò che è meritevole per quel tipo di società, ma intendendo il merito come ciò che permette la trasformazione di ogni singolarità. E in questo senso forse si apre un'idea di scuola che non è più la scuola che a partire da una cultura seleziona, valuta, misura, fa distinzioni e seleziona i capaci e meritevoli, ma di una scuola che è in grado di trasformare tutti gli individui, ciascun individuo, e che quindi è capace di dialogare anche con culture diverse da quelle che rappresentano l'istituzione in quel momento. È per questo che la dinamica del pluralismo, ed è per questo che la dinamica di quello che chiamiamo alternanza della dimensione del lavoro all'interno delle scuole, di tante forme scolastiche differenti, possono aprire una scuola che sappia riconoscere i meriti di ciascuno e in questo modo forse avvicinarsi a quel paradigma più russoiano di Comenio, di un'istituzione che non è tanto istituzione che seleziona e riproduce se stessa, critica di Bourdieu, quanto di un'istituzione che è capace di mettersi in discussione, essere plurale dentro se stesso e aprirsi alle singolarità. Vi ringrazio.
Grazie Andrea. I tuoi riferimenti a Bourdieu è un tema ricorrente in questi 3 giorni perché c'è molta affinità, molte somiglianze. Abbiamo discusso che cosa poteva essere proprio quello che accomunava il pensiero della scuola di Barbiana, visto la lettera, e anche il pensiero di Don Milani per caso, e quello di Bourdieu più tardi. È un discorso che abbiamo discusso molto in fondo in questi 3 giorni. Adesso apriamo per il dibattito, un Q&A, come si dice in inglese. Allora, possiamo usare sia l'inglese sia l'italiano. Abbiamo avuto oggi un intervento in italiano, che ieri era l'opposto, abbiamo avuto tanti interventi in italiano e uno solo in inglese. Allora, ci sono tanti temi, chi vuole cominciare alla facoltà. So we're opening it up for debate. Who would like to make a statement, ask a question, etc. Now's the chance to do it. And then we will close the whole conference. I will repeat. Those who would like to listen to the recording of Eduardo Martinelli, eventually in a short time we will have everything on site. We will have everything on the UNESCO chair site, as in the previous examples. So, who would like to go ahead? I would like to stay quiet because I've taken up a lot of time already with these 3 days. Michael, would you like to say something?
off the cuff. I cannot. I mean, I'm still digesting what Andrea said, which is very, very deep,
Very interesting. Yes.
very interesting.
Or Joseph.
That
Or-
thing about meritocracy is very interesting because, I mean,
yeah.
again, it seems something that many within the mainstream left today, they seem to put it as a kind of cavallo di battaglia, when in fact,
It's so perceived. Sociologically, however, out there, when I say out there, I say in the public sphere, it is considered to still be, and this is one of the things that I think is part of the French critique, not just Bourdieu, the French critique of the revolution, the French Revolution, the Napoleonic idea of having a Grande École, la Scuola Normale. Go and see who goes to the Scuola Normale. I discussed this with my Italian colleagues, who has the advantages to compete. Something which even socialists have never understood in Malta, especially. Right? The worker-student scheme. Do you remember? You were very young, Michael. But the worker-student scheme, by making it more competitive to enter university, how many O levels, is going to favor the middle class because they have more resources to win the battle. I mean, come on. So the more you're going to be stiff in your entrance procedure, the more you're going to favor those who have the advantages to compete and legitimize themselves for doing so. And I think Don Milani, before the debate about meritocracy, maybe it was already raging in France, I'm sure it was, because after all, they were the emblem. France was one of the major centers of meritocracy. So the Code Napoleon, I mean, that's something that Napoleon didn't understand, and not even the leader, the Maltese Napoleon of the time, did not understand, because when they introduced the point system to enter university, they were favoring middle-class students, of course. There were some working-class students who benefited from that scheme, of course. But in relative terms, you will find that you are going to favor always quelli che appartengono alla ditta, as they write in the when they talk about the vignette of Pierino. Per forza, appartiene alla ditta. He speaks the same language, ha lo stesso, what Bourdieu would call the same cultural capital and social capital too, of course.
That's one thing. Plus, even those from the working classes or from the deprived classes who will make it, it would be I mean, they would make it generally as individuals, not. It won't be the class itself, which.
Yes, but yes, I often think about that, but it seems to be passé now to think along those times. Collective mobility as a class. Yeah, Gramsci wrote about that when he was talking about, idealistically, in my view, before he was imprisoned, when he was talking about the value of workers' education. They used to come over a day's work, he writes, is in Scritti Politici, pubblicato dalla Riuniti. They come after a day's work, and they come not for individual advancement, but as class consciousness. Well, today is very difficult, because today it's a different climate. Even more difficult than Milani's time, I would say, in the 60s. 60s, you have the area of the well, Sessantotto. He died 67. I mean, come on, we were there or thereabouts. So it was in the air. Okay, the singing of what's his name, guy from Genoa. The whole culture, Professor Andrea, etc. In fact, no wonder when you have a documentary on Rai 3 on Don Milani, you hear Fabrizio De André's voice. Pasolini, I keep saying Pirandello by mistake, Pasolini, etc. It's all there. But today, when you define your liberation by the clothes you wear, and you will go into great debts because you are losing in terms of the value of money to buy those clothes, to distinguish yourself, to position yourself in relation to others, where nobody wants to believe that he or she is working class. Okay, because they think they are middle class. In actual fact, they've become déclassé. This is very difficult to promote this collective idea. So even today, meritocracy has been utilized, I would say, in terms of destroying a kind of appartenenza di gruppo. I wouldn't say class only, but that sort of thing. It's all consumption. The consumption is your liberation, the ability to consume, which Don Milani predicted, of course, predicted big time. And he was talking about the ripresa economica post-martial aid, which made Milan all of a sudden a center. You know, I mean, he was very prescient. Again, Pasolini is the same thing, of course. So yeah, but at that time there was a spirit of thinking of critica. Now I don't think there is anymore.
If my memory serves me right, one of the first who took meritocracy on the left or was Craxi. I hope, I don't know whether my
You are much more well versed than I am in this.
And in certain ways, it was also a precursor of Blair's New Labour under certain aspects.
Can you explain to us? I mean, there's a, you know, what did Craxi do exactly?
No, the idea that basically meritocracy became a cavallo di battaglia. You know, I mean, Craxi came in to modernize the Socialist Party, which up to his day, I mean, it still had even the hammer and the sickle. And he said, fare la barba Marx, if my memory serves me right.
Fare la barba Marx. Yeah. Well, he also betrayed the tacit left-wing consensus that we will not align ourselves with the right-wing government, right? And he did that. Okay. Well, yeah. But there are different times. I wonder what Don Milani would say today. I did ask that question to Eduardo Martinelli. We have it published in a book of interviews, and we were talking about the Gulf War. And I say, what would Don Milani say? He says, well, he'll change only the examples, but the argument will be the same. Anyway, but I'm not going to elaborate because I will not do justice to what Eduardo said in that interview. But I can send you, hopefully, a copy of that interview for those who would like it. I could also send my PowerPoint because I have become, over the last 2 years, allergic to PowerPoints. I never stick to the discipline. This is probably I don't know if it's a strength or a weakness of my pedagogy. I cannot stick to the discipline of following a PowerPoint. I find myself constrained. Once by the second slide I take off, I don't want to interrupt that flow. Now, I personally think that's a good thing, but others will find fault with that. So I can always give you my PowerPoint. If you want it, I'll send it to you. I mean, nothing is, you know, I'm like Don Milani in that respect. You learn for others, not just for yourself. But that's very difficult to. Today, everything is a consumption, a possession, a good, a positional good. That's the point. And that's what Don Milani, I think, was against. The idea of education as a positional good. Education, like the Jesuits, he was in that respect. Service for others. That's what they say. Yeah. C'è qualche altra domanda o affermazione o osservazione? Allora, ce l'ho io al mio amico italiano Andrea Potestio, perché lui vive in Italia. Tu vivi in Italia e noi lo vediamo da fuori questa cosa, perché non possiamo dividere proprio il contesto dal suo esponente, no? In Italia, a parte Don Milani adesso è il suo anno di centenario della nascita. Un altro anno sarebbe l'anno della morte di Don Milani. Quindi un anno che tocca il 7, per esempio, dal 63. Esiste qualche altra esistono degli altri pedagogisti, diciamo così, educatori che hanno fatto, si dovrebbe studiare più in fondo come pedagogia. Qua, abbiamo menzionato Mario Lodi, si è menzionato Ada Gobetti. Ada Gobetti non è che ha fatto educazione sul campo, però ha scritto molto per motivare i genitori, no? Anche per un'Italia che sarebbe denasificata. L'esperienza, in inglese si dice denazification.
Sì, sì.
Per esempio, Don Zeno
Mm.
nel Grossetano è studiato in Italia come pedagogista
No, direi molto,
a
molto
questo
poco.
livello.
No, direi molto poco. Anche lo stesso Mario Lodi, che è stato adesso un po' riscoperto, ci sono stati studi, ma ha studiato molto poco.
Alessio Suriano ha fatto un libro
Sì,
su
sì. E Montessori in Italia, cioè se vogliamo dire una pedagogista molto studiata che ha dato avanti, che ha una scuola, una tradizione, Maria
tutto il
Montessori,
mondo.
tutto il mondo, Maria Montessori sicuramente con grande diffusione.
Però non su un discorso pedagogico politico come Don Milani, come Paolo Freire, quanto lo era, perché uno non si deve dire, non c'è bisogno che uno si dichiara l'educazione politica, ma si giudica da quello che aveva provocato, no? Il
Certo.
fatto che hanno chiuso le scuole di Montessori e lei, come si dice in inglese, she saw the writing on the wall, è partito
Mhm.
verso la Francia. Non si dice perché poi non è detto che tu si salvi, che se vai in Francia, vedi i fratelli Rosselli,
Certo.
eccetera, o Gobetti stesso,
Sì.
Piero Gobetti, ma è andato lì, vuol dire che qualcosa politico c'era nel suo discorso, nel
Sì,
suo
sì.
politico.
Su Maria Montessori, per esempio, in Italia gli effetti che lei ha generato sono stati molto assimilati dalla cultura borghese. Le scuole montessoriane in Italia, poi vabbè, su questo c'è ampio dibattito, però si sono inserite molto nell'ordinamento più borghese, meno di opposizione politica al potere, molto meno di quello che invece lei era, cioè perché in effetti Montessori era rivoluzionaria da molti punti di vista, ma gli effetti.
Femminista,
Esatto.
femminista, non credeva
Femminista,
nel matrimonio, ecco,
esatto.
queste cose sì.
Però quello che c'è
Danilo,
stato dopo è stato meno di opposizione. Sì.
Danilo Dolci è visto come un pedagogo.
Sì, Danilo Dolci, come Mario Lodi, poco studiati tutti e due, però sì, sicuramente sì. Eh, Pasolini viene studiato un po' in pedagogia che non è un pedagogista, non è un educatore in senso tecnico, però viene studiato in alcuni ambienti educativi, proprio nella linea invece di opposizione politica, cioè come proposta di un'educazione politica e di resistenza, diciamo così, in questo con qualche assonanza con Don Milani da questo punto di vista. Poi invece poi abbiamo i pedagogisti, quelli meno educatori, più classici, Aldo Agazzi, per dire, però sono pedagogisti, cioè sono stati maestri nelle scuole, però sono fondamentalmente pedagogisti accademici, cioè hanno avuto un percorso in università, in quel tipo di dibattito. E poi in Italia abbiamo comunque sempre, sul versante totalmente opposto, la figura di Giovanni Gentile, che è
Giovanni Gentile e
Giovanni
Giovanni Bosco
Gentile
anche, anche
e
Giovanni
Giovanni
Bosco.
Bosco in direzione totalmente opposta, sì, certamente, certamente.
La
Però
pedagogia del gioco, io penso
la pedagogia del gioco, tutto
che
l'ambiente
c'è un
salesiano.
confronto con l'idea, non so se è giusta, però l'idea sbagliata di Don Milani come troppo austero.
Sì, sì,
Ecco.
sì, sì, sì.
Mm.
Sì, sì, anche perché Don Milani, che contestava aspetti di ricreazione, però poi recuperava in quella dimensione di una scuola che non aveva orari e che quindi aveva il gioco insito dentro in qualche maniera, nei tempi diversi da quelli che erano i tempi
Poi
della
hanno
scuola
creato una
tradizionale.
piscina loro come
Eh,
l'educazione tecnica per
eh,
nuotare. Lui era, secondo Edoardo Martinelli, mi ha detto proprio poc'anzi, no, poc'anzi, ma poche settimane fa a Fisciano, eravamo a Salerno, mi diceva che pensa che lui era grande appassionato non di calcio, perché
mm,
criticava poco, ma di ciclismo. Don
ciclismo.
Milani era molto
Sì.
appassionato del ciclismo Quindi questa è una...
Correggimi se sbaglio, il ciclismo era grande quasi il calcio.
Sì, sì,
Ah, sì, sì.
era ai tempi di Coppi e Bartali, no? E
Coppi
dualismo.
Bartali, sì, sì.
Sì, sì, sì,
Gra-
sì. E il
grande
Giro
tradizione.
d'Italia, forse attraversarono anche le montagne, no?
Sì,
Non
sì,
so,
no,
il
no.
Mugello, eccetera.
Sì, sì, no,
Sì,
c'era grande tradizione, ma poi anche in quelle terre lì. Cioè sono terre di ciclismo e quindi con grande, grande tradizione da quel punto di
per
vista lì.
questo me l'ha detto, non era sicuro, si pensava che fosse più portato al ciclismo, Don Milani. E lui andava con bicicletta anche
Eh,
quando scendeva sulla pianura, no? Andava a Firenze dove c'era sì,
certo.
però sembra anche che Don Milani adesso la Chiesa lo sta calcolando finalmente.
Sì, sì. C'è stata una ripresa negli anni legata anche a politica, perché non bisogna
Mm.
negare che a sinistra c'è stata una grandissima ripresa.
Veltroni, no? Con l'iCare,
Sì, sì, Veltroni,
che è
Walter Veltroni.
proprio iCare, per
Sì,
quelli
sì,
che
sì.
si mettono d'ascolto adesso, che sono, non so, non sono a currente con il lavoro di Don Milani, era proprio il motto che si scriveva proprio a Barbiana, I care, mi preoccupo di tutto. E si dice perché l'opposto all'idea fascista, me ne frego. Insomma,
Sì,
questo
sì.
penso che è un po' esagerato, però insomma, ecco, dai
No,
che...
no, ci
però
sta.
che cosa pensate voi dal fatto che Papa Bergoglio, come si chiama, Papa
Mhm.
Francesco,
Sì, sì,
che secondo
Francesco.
me ha fatto molto per la Chiesa, per l'immagine della Chiesa, vuole canonizzarlo. Io ho i dubbi su questa cosa.
Mm.
In inglese noi diciamo This is the danger, he can be sanitized. Non so se esiste la parola in italiano.
Ma
Sì, sì,
Milani
sì.
può autorizzare oppure primo Mazzolari?
No, but even Milani.
No,
He went to Barbiana, and
no,
Daniel
adesso per
Shigurensky
esempio.
was happy about it because an Argentinian pope went to Barbiana. No, no, he wants to start the process of beatification, etc. And I
Mm.
remember having a discussion with a colleague of mine who you know, Michael, but I won't mention names here. And she told me that's one of the I said I'm not happy with it, and is it the danger of sanitized? You said because then once you turn a person into a saint, even Corso Toral told me this, fare un santo,
Mm.
even Corso Toral,
Sì, sì,
che lei ha
sì,
menzionato, perché Corso
sì.
Toral, Corso, Jorge, ecco, facciamo dei santi, poi perderanno qualche cosa di radicale del loro radicalismo della scuola, perché la critica di Don Milani è una critica radicale, diciamolo pure, per la scuola,
Sì, sì.
al di là dell'aspetto
Sì, sì.
religioso.
Mhm.
Insomma,
Sì,
io no.
Domilani è un oppositore, no? Il fatto di assimilarlo in un'istituzione vuol dire un pochino ridurne l'aspetto positivo, perché è un
Because,
oppositore, è un
but,
antagonista.
by the same token, Bergoglio being Argentinian, I wouldn't be surprised if you try to also beatify or saint Paulo Freire, because Paulo Freire was a very declared credente. Paulo Freire made no
Mhm.
bones about it, huh? And forget this trash which is being put about by people who want to secularize Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire, when he says, I am a man of faith, I asked his second wife, because the first one died, as you know. So he married again. Elsa, not Elsa, Elsa's the one who died. Nita Freire is a personal friend of mine, and I met his daughter who lives in Geneva. And when I asked him about his religious, no. He was a religious, he was a pater familia. We read things, etc. Catholic. Punto. He also said, I want to die a socialist and a Catholic. So, and he was given the award of the Catholic educator, he and his first wife, Elsa. You know, if we start doing this, I think, I don't know, I will have mixed feelings about it. I will not deny them if they want that, or the family wants that, but I find it very mixed feeling, you know. I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons why we don't mention John Giovanni Bosco a lot, because he's a saint, you know,
Mhm.
but he has a lot about pedagogy. And we in Malta have somebody similar. We have Don George Preka, who's our saint, our first saint, and only, I suppose, right? Am I wrong?
Sì.
Michael.
Right.
Don George Frege, a lot has been written about his pedagogy. But then there are also contradictions. He was all fire and brimstone, this kind of thing. But like the fire sermons of John Donne, etc. But on the other hand, his pedagogy was very revolutionary for Malta and the colonial context and the pre-Vatican Council II. He used Maltese when Latin was used before Vatican Council II. That was,
Israel mentioned that he was one of the most prolific people who prolific writers in Maltese. Thinking also that he came from an Italianate background.
Don George. And Pestalozzi, you mentioned Pestalozzi. Pestalozzi had a great influence on a person of a continental background. We call it continental because we had the Anglo-Saxon influence. Who shaped our primary education, but he was not allowed to develop it the way he wanted because we were a colony of Britain, and that was Canon Paolo Pulicino, who was the chief superintendent. He had the first chair of pedagogy at our university, where basically what it consisted, he was an inspector, used to go around the school and then observe what's happening and then give a lecture to the teachers at the university. And he had a cathedra, but they stopped at cathedra. And he was very much influenced by Pestalozzi because he studied his formation, not as a pedagogue. His formation was at the Sorbonne in Paris, and La Sapienza di Roma. Okay, and he was the chief superintendent of education in Malta, and he is glorified as one of the first people who promoted a form of formal education in Malta at the primary level, and had the first chair of pedagogy because he combined his roles at the time. He was stopped. He was stopped because he was not teaching English, etc. And he was during the British Empire when we were a colony, 1850. We're talking about here. So Pestalozzi was one of the figures that influenced his thinking. That was very progressive for that time, I'm sure. More than even though the English were seen as a modernizing force in Malta, in many respects. Gramsci himself writes this in the prison notebooks, nelle quaderni le due note su Malta, uno dei quali prendeva non in giro, così, criticava molto gli italianisti, quelli che credevano nell'italianità, e diceva che i colonizzatori inglesi erano più moderni in questo caso, hanno modernizzato un po' perché hanno contrapposto l'elite tradizionale maltese che era filo mezzogiorno italiano, intellettuali tradizionali di Gramsci, quelli del sud, nella questione meridionale, quelli si sentivano anche a Malta. Gramsci per questo io lo ammiro, perché parla del mio paese in questo senso, indirettamente. La questione meridionale, che è l'aspetto che più mi interessa di Gramsci, più quella sulla scuola. Anche lui parlava come gli inglesi erano una forza, perché era una forza industrializzata. Ecco, questa cosa. Ha una nota su questo. Sono 2 note nei quaderni su Malta, perché lui leggeva Civiltà Cattolica, perché nel carcere si faceva leggere quella rivista dei Gesuiti. E questo parla dei nipotini di padre Bresciani, eccetera. E quando lì fa riferimento a Malta, fa una domanda su Enrico Mizzi, che fu il primo ministro maltese, molto pro-italiano culturalmente, che era uno degli fondatori del Partito Nazionalista Nazionale italiana, quando lui fu studente di giurisprudenza o diritto ad Urbino. È una domanda che se è lo stesso Enrico Mizzi, e lo è. E l'altra era sull'italianità, che lui, un italiano, Gramsci, un sardo, prendeva così, come si dice, con una... non si fidava di questo movimento a Malta perché dicevano che gli inglesi furono una forza modernista, pur essendo colonizzatori.
Certo.
Insomma, quindi
Bene.
c'è questo legame fra gli intellettuali tradizionali maltesi e quello che scrisse Gramsci, quindi sarebbe molto interessante anche studiare questa cosa, anche mettendo anche in mezzo Don Milani.
Grazie.
Don Milani non era comunista, anzi, sotto certi aspetti era molto anticomunista. Riferisco ancora alla famosa lettera con Pipetta, però condivideva con i comunisti la motivazione per il cambiamento. L'ha detto a Pipetta, però una volta che siamo arrivati là, che vuol dire mai, probabilmente è un'utopia, ti darò il ben servito, o ti lascio perché abbiamo strade diverse da trascorrere. Però aveva molto rispetto per Gramsci, aveva molto rispetto. Si leggevano i quaderni e le lettere a Barbiano. L'ha detto, l'ha confermato proprio Edoardo Martinelli molte volte, anche l'abbiamo scritto questo nella nostra intervista. Quindi come intellettuale Gramsci parlava molto a Don Milani, c'era qualche risonanza con Don Milani. Quindi ci sono punti che accomuna Milani a certi pensieri gramsciani, non tutti, ma certi pensieri. Insomma,
Grazie, io vi devo salutare, vi ringrazio molto per il dibattito interessante. Grazie, grazie
salutami
Peter.
ai nostri amici di Bergamo.
Va bene, grazie dell'invito. Grazie.
Yeah. Well,
Chiudiamo, Peter.
chiudiamo. Okay. So thanks everybody for making this, I would say, abbastanza quite successful. We have given homage to a person, I think, who we have to say our faculty has promoted Don Milani's work. We cannot say that anybody of this generation which goes through our programs at the University of Malta, thanks to people like Carmel Borch and others, have never heard of Don Milani. I had never heard of him when I did my teacher education there. All we heard about was, okay, the usual ones, John Dewey, Pestalozzi, Rousseau, Gramsci, with Professor Kenneth Wayne mostly, and many sociologists, etc., from the Anglo-Saxon world and the French world, but never Don Milani. But this new generation has, because there's a crop of people who now are trying to broaden the points of reference of our teacher education. So we can't say, but apart from Italy and Spain and Malta, maybe, there's little knowledge of Don Milani, even despite the fact that most of his work has been translated into English, not the Esperienze Pastorali. But one work which has been translated in America is L'obbedienza non è più virtù. A Just War does not exist. It is a book produced by John Burchell from Notre Dame University in Indiana. That's where our late Professor Joseph Buttigieg was a prof, the father of Peter Buttigieg. The good Joe Buttigieg was a very good friend of ours, certainly mine and many others in our faculty. So we paid homage to Don Milani. Last year, we paid homage to Julius Nyerere. And the previous year, when we started the series, we paid homage to Paulo Freire and, of course, Raymond Williams, all on their birth centenary year. Next year, if I'm alive and I'm still kicking, okay, I plan to do Alberto Manzi had a lot of interesting things to celebrate in terms of television and the use of television in literacy. But also we have to change the criteria because it's going to be a long wait to get a woman, and we have to do this. Well, otherwise, we're not inclusive, and that it goes against the milieu of our faculty. So we will be changing the criteria. I think it's about time, after 3 years that she passed away, we celebrate somebody like Bell Hooks and eventually Ada Gobetti and maybe Krupskaya Lenin and Sister Dorothy Day. There are many figures who have to be celebrated, and we have to find the right pretext or the right moment to do this. Therefore, we have to find the right criteria for change. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joseph, for your support, moral and technical, and also academic. Thank you, Michael, for being here. Thank you. Thanks all of you, all the speakers. Thanks a lot. I repeat, within a few weeks, maybe after Christmas, we will have the edited version of the recordings on our website. All you have to do is Google Global UNESCO Chair in Global Adult Education. It will come up. And there will be also the one we missed, which is going to be recorded on Tuesday. On Saturday, the intervention by Eduardo Martinelli, one of the 8 boys of Barbiana. Go to the website. You have quite a resource. It's full of resources which you can also use for your own teaching back home in different languages. Thank you very much. I wish you all the best for Christmas and the New Year. Thank you.